You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja.
We love the herb.
It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Wednesday, May 3rd, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Welcome to the Marijuana Agenda. Today on the show, we'll be getting straight to your cannabis headline news right after the first break with an update on what's happening with Washington, D.C.'s plans to legalize taxing and regulating marijuana. Coming up in the Cannabis Minority Report today, we've actually got two editions of the Minority Report. In the first half hour, we'll hear from Deborah Small and her talk on addiction for profit and how that ties into the Black Lives Matter movement and mass incarceration. We'll also hear from CNN commentator Marc Lamont Hill, who headed up a panel on prison reform. Both of these took place at the Not One Step Back strategy seminar that was put on by Drug Policy Alliance on April 22nd in Atlanta, Georgia. Also, we'll have some drug war data mining on the National District Attorneys Association and a radical rant on the latest madness about alcohol and marijuana. That's all coming up today in the first hour of the Marijuana Agenda. Those of you watching and listening live, you can stay tuned for Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio, where we'll cover more of the latest stories in marijuana and take your calls at 650-LEGAL-MJ. We got to take a break, and we're back with the Cannabis Headline News right after this.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb and licensed by the City of Portland.
It's time for Cannabis Facts about Alzheimer's from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A new Florida study in the journal Molecular and Cellular Neuroscience found that cannabis promotes the growth of healthy new brain tissue. It can slow the effects of Alzheimer's and may in fact be able to halt it entirely. A long-term study by Ohio State University's Professor Gary Wenk concludes that people who regularly use marijuana get Alzheimer's at a much lower rate than others. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
The Marijuana Agenda, like the pharmaceutical agenda, without all the side effects, overdose deaths, insurance.
Side effects may include nausea, dry mouth, and constipation. Dry mouth, constipation, indigestion, and abdominal pain,
which can occur without warning and may cause death.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for the Cannabis Minority Report from the Minority Cannabis Business Association. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Wednesday, May 3rd, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. Massroots is reporting that lawmakers in Congress are moving to further crack down on Washington, D.C.'s ability to spend its own money to legalize and regulate marijuana sales. Low-level possession and cultivation of cannabis is already legal in the nation's capital under a ballot measure that District of Columbia voters overwhelmingly approved in 2014. But the city has been stymied from moving ahead to legally regulate and tax the marijuana market under a series of annual congressional riders enacted in recent years. Known as the Harris Amendment, after its sponsor, Congressman Andy Harris, a Republican of Maryland, the rider contains two parts. One provision mandating that the city can't spend any federal funds on legalization, and a second that strips it of the power to spend its own locally raised money on ending prohibition. But under the new funding legislation, the scope of the ban would be even further expanded. The key difference is that while the former version only barred the district from spending money allocated in a given year's specific funding bill on legalization, the new version prevents the spending of any money to regulate marijuana. The Vermont House of Representatives approved by a vote of 74 to 68 a non-commercial marijuana legalization bill that removes penalties for low-level possession and home cultivation. The vote took place after a late-night session and 5 hours of heated debate. The action was second reading, and third reading is expected on Wednesday. The body defeated an amendment to expand the bill by adding legal and taxed sales. It also moved to delay consideration of a separate Senate-passed legislation to allow legal marijuana commerce by one legislative day. However, it is likely that the vote will not be taken up by the Senate until January. The bill passed by the House would eliminate Vermont's civil penalty for possessing 1 ounce or less of marijuana, and it would eliminate penalties for possession of up to 2 mature marijuana plants and up to 4 immature marijuana plants. Lawmakers in Hawaii gave final approval to bills to change use of the word marijuana to cannabis in statutes and to add new medical cannabis qualifying conditions to include rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, epilepsy, and multiple sclerosis. The bills would also increase the number of marijuana plants that a qualified patient and primary caregiver may jointly possess from 7 to 10 plants at any stage of growth. It would grant patients and caregivers access to laboratory testing for their medical marijuana, and it authorizes the Department of Health to permit additional retail dispensing locations and cultivation of additional plants for dispensary licensees. Oregonians who'd hoped for an end to workplace marijuana testing are out of luck. Employers may still require their workers to pass a drug test after a bill that would have banned the practice hit a dead end in the state Senate. Although Senate Bill 301 survived a crucial April 18th deadline for lawmakers to vote it out of committee, backers now acknowledge they lack support to bring it up for a vote in the full Senate. Supporters said the bill was necessary to fix a discrepancy. Employers can still make passing a cannabis test a condition of employment 2 years after the state legalized recreational pot and nearly 2 decades after Oregon legalized its medical marijuana program. Before the bill died, legislators added an amendment that would have narrowed it to protect only medical marijuana users. Yesterday, Uruguayan adults interested in legally purchasing cannabis for non-medical uses began registering to do so at post offices around the country. The law allows Uruguayan adults 18 years and older and foreign residents, but not tourists, to legally obtain cannabis in one of 3 ways: home growing, cannabis clubs, and commercial sales. These are mutually exclusive, meaning those interested can only sign up to access cannabis from one method at a time. In the months since the first home-growing licenses were issued in August 2014, the law's regulatory authority, the Institute for the Regulation and Control of Cannabis, has registered over 6,600 households to legally grow cannabis. The law allows each registered household to possess up to 6 flowering plants at any given time, with the understanding that their annual yield should not exceed 480 grams. The first cannabis clubs were registered in October 2014, and the number of legal cannabis clubs has now grown to 51. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Wednesday, May 3rd, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
This is Cannabis Facts from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org, supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. In 1937, the second most prescribed medicine, marijuana, was banned. It wasn't about marijuana. The paper, oil, and chemical industries lobbied to end hemp farming. No longer labor intensive, an acre of hemp produced more quality paper than 4 acres of trees. Plastics and fibers could be produced from a plant. Hemp can even produce 10 times the energy of today's ethanol. As marijuana prohibition ends, many states now allow farmers to again grow hemp. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to process America's hemp crop at hempinc.com.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 2 weeks for Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine from the Burning Issues podcast on CannabisRadio.com. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
This is the Cannabis Minority Report, brought to you by the Minority Cannabis Business Association at minoritycannabis.org. The war on drugs has been called the new Jim Crow, for how it disproportionately polices and incarcerates people of color. As marijuana legalization proceeds, institutional barriers still prevent minorities from fully participating in the new industry. Today, we take a deeper look at these issues in the Cannabis Minority Report.
Throughout my talk this morning, I'm going to make references to the art and to film for the points that I want to make, because so much of how we've expressed ourselves to the world, to America, has been through the artistic expression. So one of my favorite films is Daughters of the Dust. Come on, Deborah. And the thing for me about that film that just sticks with me is the grandmother who talks about how important it is for us to recall, recollect, and remember who we are. Because the reality for me is that we cannot move forward unless we remember our past and carry it with us and use it to discern our present and create our future. So looking back to the place that we've come and to where we are now, I think it's really important for us to think about, why is it that black people are in America? Why are we in this country? Why were we brought here? We didn't choose it. We didn't volunteer. We didn't sign a contract and said, we want to come over here and work for y'all for 7 years. Why are we here? We're here because this is a country that built their economy on promoting addiction for profit. We don't talk about that when we talk about what America is, but let's think about it. The first crops that created the engine for this economy were tobacco, sugar, and rum. All addictive drugs for which there was not a market. Our enslavement was designed to facilitate that market. We were brought here to be beasts of burdens, to produce a market for addiction for profit. Why is that important in terms of talking about the drug war? Because there is something to me absolutely perverse for a group of people who had everything taken from them in order to support someone else promoting addiction, now accepting being punished, locked up, and having everything taken away from them again for addiction. Like, really, to think about it. Like, what does that mean? And how is it that we accept that as a reasonable frame for punishment? To say that drugs are so bad that they justify the things that we do to people. because they use those particular drugs. Not even the most harmful ones. Not even the most addictive ones. Not even the ones that are guaranteed to cause death if you use them, like tobacco. Not even the ones that are frying our brains every day, like sugar. Okay? Which to me is the most addictive, harmful drug that people don't even relate to as a drug. So why is it that we have a whole system that's based on locking people up for their relationship with a plant? And why is it that as a community we've been willing to accept that for so many years? So for me, I'm going to refer to another film, which I thought was brilliant in illustrating some of these points, which is 12 Years a Slave. And I want to refer to it for two things. First of all, I want to refer to it for taking away the romanticized notion that people have about what slavery was and slavery is. But I'm going to go a little bit deeper than my man did in 12 Years a Slave, because he put that in the past. And I'm going to bring it to the present. And I'm going to remind you all about that case in Cleveland a few years ago when they found those 3 women who had been locked up and held for 10 years. So I want you to think about it. Each one of those women was kidnapped off the street, taken into a home and put in chains, literally prevented from being able to wash, eat, or do anything other than what their captor wanted them to do. They were used physically, beaten, violated, raped repeatedly, beaten, forced to do all kinds of things for a period of more than 10 years. And when people found out about it, they were like, oh my God, that's horrendous, that's horrible. And the man had to keep that hidden because now it's against the law. But for more than 300 years in this country, all of that was legal. All of it was legal. Kidnapping people, keeping them in chains, as a woman, using us as sex slaves, forcing us to produce children that we didn't want, and then taking them away and selling them to someone else. All of that was legal. So 300 years ago, that Cleveland guy didn't have to worry about keeping that secret. He could go through the world and let people know what he was doing and be affirmed for that. So I want us to really think about what the history of this place is and what it was built on. It was built on torture. It was built on enslavement. It was built on the exploitation of human and physical resources in order to profit a few. Now, to me, about what's interesting about being in Georgia is that many people, including people here, forget that this state started as a penal colony. It started as a place where the English dumped the folks that they didn't want from home. It was too expensive to lock them up, and they needed bodies to work. So this is the place where they sent their criminals. And this is the thing that began to build the economy here. So is it surprising at all that a state that started as a penal colony still has an attachment to punishment, still has an attachment to criminalization, still likes to make money from locking people up, still thinks of people as refuse to be gotten rid of, disposable, something that we're not willing to invest in? Started with black people, but doesn't end there. Because for me, the ugly truth about the South in general is that it's a region that's willing to hold everybody down in order to keep black people from rising up. It's willing to keep the majority of its people ignorant and uneducated in order to prevent black people from being educated. Think about that. You have a whole region of states of people who literally believe that their success can only be accomplished by keeping their foot on your neck. And so this is the thing that the 2 points I want to leave people with. First and foremost, the other part of 12 Years a Slave to me that's relevant for black people is that he did a really good job of illustrating who we are vis-a-vis punishment. That scene where Solomon was kind of hanging, they wanted to lynch him, but they couldn't, and so he was literally hanging barely by a rope for hours. And eventually, all the other people on the plantation came out of their homes and went on about their business as if he wasn't there. And for me, that was such a perfect illustration of who we be. Seeing suffering in our community every day, seeing people near death every day, and walking away and not looking at it because we don't believe that we can actually do anything about it. And that's a conditioning. That's part of our legacy of enslavement. I want to ask this question. I want people to ask themselves this question. Does racial oppression require cooperation across color lines? Like, it's easy on one level for us to talk about what white people have done to us, but it's harder for us to acknowledge the ways in which we've supported that and facilitated that and allowed that to continue. And so my bottom line is, as long as we are attached to punishment, as long as we believe it works, the system will continue to deliver it to us. As long as we believe that there's a certain percentage of our community that's criminals, that we need to be protected from, the system will keep coming for them and taking them away. And the truth is that they keep coming for them younger and younger. So what is that really about? And I want to leave you all with this one metaphor that comes from another film, but one you guys probably haven't seen. It's a documentary called Lodge Ghetto, and it's about what happened to the Jewish community in Krakow during the Nazi occupation. And to me, it's really important because our history as oppressed people is very similar to the history of the Jewish people, who were identified as a race, regardless of what they looked like, who were oppressed and stigmatized as a race. And yet in America, when we see Nazi propaganda films talking about Jews in the ghetto and their living conditions, etc., we see that for what it is, propaganda. But when we see the same films made about black people in our community who suffered the exact same conditions of being ghettoized, stripped of their citizenship, driven out of their occupations, not allowed to get jobs, etc., we don't see that as the consequence of government policy. We see that as something wrong with them. There's something about black culture. So what is that about? So this is the thing for me, and this is the parallel I want to make to that, which is that the community there really believed that their survival was dependent on cooperating with the Germans because they were under their control. And so they did all the things they were asked to do. They built schools, factories, they found jobs for people, etc. But what they didn't recognize was that they were faced with people who actually just wanted their extermination. And so at a certain point, the Germans came to the head rabbi and said, you have to deliver 20,000 people. We want all the children under 10 and all the adults over 60. And at this point, it was impossible for people to pretend that they were going to be delivered for anything other than liquidation, because these weren't people who were capable of working. And so the leader went before the community with tears and basically said, this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I can't believe it, but send me your children. Send me your elderly. Better that we sacrifice this 20,000 and preserve the other 200,000 that are living in the ghetto. And so that's what people did. But what they failed to recognize, and this is said with no blame because I'm not sure that any of us would have recognized it in the same circumstance, but what they failed to recognize was that they were being tested. The Germans wanted to see if they would protect anybody. And the message is that once you are willing to sacrifice your most vulnerable people, then that means that you won't protect anyone.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. Subscribe now for free at mjagenda.com.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
It's time for Cannabis Facts about teen drug use from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org. This message is supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. A recent survey by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control indicates that in states that have legalized medical marijuana, the rate of marijuana consumption among high school students has not increased. In fact, in legal states like Colorado, teen use has actually decreased significantly. It's simply no longer a big deal for teenagers in legal states. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for Cannabis Sports Medicine from the Gridiron Cannabis Coalition. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
The National District Attorneys Association has released a position paper on marijuana that states federal drug enforcement policy regarding marijuana should be applied consistently across the nation to maintain the respect for the rule of law. Well, that's not really a surprise. Did we expect the prosecutors of America to not endorse not enforcing the federal laws? That's kind of their job. But the surprise here is how the prosecutors have made their case for their position. One concern they have about legalization is the fear of stoned mayhem on the freeways, or SMOF, as I like to call it. They write, quote, "Since a majority of states have legalized marijuana for medical and or recreational use, marijuana-impaired driving cases will continue to present unique challenges for prosecutors," end quote. Well, why since legalization? Legalization doesn't invent stoned drivers. Cars and weed have been around since the beginning of the 20th century. As the NDAA explains, quote, "A driver who exhibits clues of impairment, along with evidence of marijuana, could be successfully prosecuted for impaired driving," end quote. Well, that doesn't change when the possession of marijuana is legal. Now, to their credit, NDAA makes it clear that testing for marijuana and metabolites in blood and urine is a fool's errand, stating, quote, "Scientific studies have not yet demonstrated support for marijuana per se levels similar to alcohol," end quote. But the district attorneys flop when they state that, quote, "Marijuana use has been shown to increase crash risk," end quote. For years now, prohibitionists have relied on a meta-analysis published in the British Medical Journal in 2014 purporting a doubling of crash risk in drivers who test positive for marijuana. The problem with that statistic is it did not correct for age and gender. Ask any car insurer and they'll tell you that male drivers aged 19 to 24 are the worst drivers. Guess who consumes the most marijuana most often in America? Over 1 in 5 people aged 19 to 23 consume marijuana monthly, And at age 24, it's at 18.1%. There is no other age that breaks the 20% rate. And overall, over 1 in 10 men toke monthly, but just 1 in 16 women do. Even the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration found recently that, quote, better controlled studies have found no or lower elevated crash risk estimates, end quote. Another concern for the National District Attorneys Association is the tried and true, what about the children?
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Or as I like to call it, WOTC. They write, quote, legalization of marijuana clearly sends a message to youth that marijuana is not dangerous and increases youth access to marijuana, end quote. Oh, really? Because according to the statistics, if the youth are getting any message about legal weed, it seems to be business as usual. Washington State says, quote, rates of teen marijuana use have remained steady despite the changing landscape, end quote. Colorado says, quote, youth marijuana use remains relatively unchanged, end quote. Oregon says, quote, recent trends in youth use have been stable, end quote. Teens also aren't finding greater access to marijuana. Since 1975, the Monitoring the Future survey has asked 12th graders how difficult it would be to score some pot. The rate of teens responding easy or fairly easy had been as high as 90% and never dipped below 80% until the year after 4 states had legal marijuana. Folks, this is just common sense. Teens' access to weed isn't through the stores. It's through the guy who deals in the parking lot behind shop class. It's older folks like me who gain increased access through legalization, as evidenced by senior use increasing by over half since legalization. The rest of their position paper touches on the hoary marijuana scares like the gateway theory, debunked since 1999, that pot causes IQ loss, that's been debunked by studying twins, one who smokes, one who doesn't. That weed leads to dropout, unemployment, welfare, and dissatisfaction. Funny how a criminal record can do that. And legal pot has increased poison control calls, since people can be honest now about what made them or their kid or their dog sick. Even though such poison control calls are down in Colorado, following a public education campaign on marijuana edibles. The National District Attorneys Association is willing to promote every reefer madness talking point available to help obfuscate a truth that is becoming clearer every day. This nation has a mass incarceration problem, largely fueled by the unchecked power of these same district attorneys to prosecute drug possession. In his new book, Locked In, criminologist and law professor John Pfaff notes that between 2000 and 2014, our prison population only increased by 100,000. But 9.6 million new prisoners were minted. It's not the long-term violent offenders that are the problem. It's the short-term, non-violent offenders who shuffle in and shuffle out of the system, permanently marked as criminals for the next employment, educational aid, or housing application. It's those offenders, largely drug possessors, that make up the bulk of the district attorney's workload. Research shows that 95% of all criminal cases are resolved with guilty plea bargains. Prosecutors since 1994 increased felony charges by almost 40%, even as crime and arrests fell. Prosecutors pile on those felony charges like stacking chips at the poker table, so that when it comes time for that plea deal, they have the upper hand. Despite the falling crime rates, the number of prosecutors increased by half, even as they maintained virtually the same rate of prison admissions per prosecutor between 23 and 25. If marijuana is legalized and federal enforcement is waived, then how will these over 30,000 district attorneys pile on the extra charges of possession with intent to deliver, conspiracy to traffic controlled substances, use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, felony child endangerment, use of a communications facility to commit a felony, and whatever else other scary charges they need to convince a cannabis consumer to plead guilty to a simple possession charge to avoid a trial in front of an increasingly marijuana-friendly jury pool? The next time the National District Attorneys Association wants to write up a position paper on marijuana, rather than copying prohibitionist group Project Sam's FAQ page, they should just let Kevin Sabet write it for them.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hey everybody, it's Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
Hey, this is Willie Nelson for Normal. And I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. There's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting those who smoke marijuana responsibly. To learn what you can do to help, contact NORML at NORML.org or call toll-free 888-67-NORMAL.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
I'm Russ Belville with the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for Cultivator's Corner with Jorge Cervantes from marijuanagrowing.com. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
This is the Cannabis Minority Report, brought to you by the Minority Cannabis Business Association at minoritycannabis.org. The war on drugs has been called the new Jim Crow, for how it disproportionately polices and incarcerates people of color. As marijuana legalization proceeds, institutional barriers still prevent minorities from fully participating in the new industry. Today, we take a deeper look at these issues in the Cannabis Minority Report.
I want you all, everybody on the panel, and everybody may not be able to answer it specifically, but I want everybody to take a stab at this question of what abolition looks like. I've been fascinated by Patrisse Cullors' tweets. I'm fascinated by everything Patrisse does, but her tweets about abolition and what it looks like in real life, and her conversation in the last panel about what that meant was incredibly important to me. And I think we're at a moment in history where it might be easier for people to imagine, particularly in the era of Trump, it is easier for people to imagine the end of the world itself than to imagine a world without prisons. How do we alter our minds, our spirits, our creative output, our intellectual work, whatever it is? What do we do to begin to imagine and usher in a world that doesn't equate justice with punishment and punishment with confinement all the time? So we can start anywhere. Brian, maybe I'll start with you. And then y'all jump in as needed.
Yeah. So first, I want to thank everyone. I'm trying to get out of organizer and administrator mode, and focusing on some of the finer details of the conference. But I definitely want to thank all of you all for being here today. And after having listened to some of the panelists, I'm gonna say again, I'm gonna paraphrase the views and opinions expressed here today. Y'all really went in. I will be maybe looking for y'all for a job after today, and that's why I wanted my children to be here today too. So if I do lose it, they'll see that their daddy did it for a good reason, for a worthy cause. It's interesting. I think about a lot of organizations that I've been a part of and see, and I think about their vision statement, and you would hope, or at least I would, that it encapsulates some of what dreaming of this world would look like. So at the Kennedy Satcher Center for Mental Health Equity, I think I'm gonna get this right. It's to ensure equitable access for behavioral health care and opportunities to achieve optimal health. But what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
And so I started to try to think about that. And over the past few days, in different spaces, which I hope to share a little bit about over the course of the panel. But so trying to think about what that world looked like, and I often close my eyes to do it. So is that a world where people at all levels of health, across the mental health spectrum, from optimal health to chronic and persistent and severe mental illness, have equitable access to culturally responsive services and resources right in the communities where they live, work, play, grow, age, worship, and learn, so that they can thrive, survive, and thrive from their families, the social supports they get from their families, friends, and community, all the way to professional services, whether that's drug therapy, counseling, and perhaps most importantly, with the freedom to choose those services and resources or not. And also, in a way, without fear, shame, guilt, and stigma.
For me, I try to, ground it in my personal commitments. And so I'm a commitment to sustainable leadership, to work in service of marginalized communities, to usher in the third Reconstruction. And the reason why I wax hard against mass incarceration, structural racism, malignant capitalism, patriarchy, and those things that animate that system is because it acts as an impediment to achieving that third Reconstruction. And so for me, when I think about envisioning what that world would look like, I look at history as my teacher. And so look at the first Reconstruction. The 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments were passed. African Americans built economic infrastructure. We created Black Wall Street in Rosewood and in Durham and in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We elected hundreds of former slaves and free black folks to elected offices in state legislatures all across the South. And we did that from 1865 to 1877, 12 years, right? So I want you to imagine that we're now in 2030, 13 years, right? And we've won. And I'm going to tick off a few of the things that I think would have been accomplished for us to achieve that third Reconstruction. So and I'm putting dates to it and being really specific. So from 2018 to 2020, DPA partners organized Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings all across the country to act as that moral center where directly impacted people could speak truth to power, similar to what happened in South Africa. We built, in 2022, partners helped organize people in 2/3 of the states, 30 states, to amend the 13th Amendment to finally abolish slavery for real and take out that huge exception clause. In 2024, we elected the first formerly incarcerated president of the United States, and directly impacted people were elected to office at every level of government across the country. As a result of this work, we generated the political will to create a domestic Marshall Plan, and we paid reparations for slavery and the drug war to the communities that have been disadvantaged and ravaged over the past 50 years. That happened in 2026. And finally, over this 13-year period, we dismantled capitalism and created a cooperative economy that supports the flourishing of human beings. And so that's what that new world looks like for me.
So I want y'all to continue to answer this question, but let me put it in concrete terms for folk who are imagining abolition, and they might be outsiders to the abolition. They don't know critical resistance yet. Mm-hmm. They haven't read Are Prisons Obsolete yet. This is their first conference. And they thinking, this cool. I hear everything y'all saying, but somebody stole my TV. And I really like my TV. Mm-hmm. And something got to happen because I lost my TV. And then somebody else is like, yeah, I hear y'all about resolution, and I hear you about investment in people. I'm with y'all, right? But I got this cousin. Or it's this dude on my block. And if you met this dude on my block, you might feel differently about the need for prison, right? No, but this is the conversation, right? Oftentimes the abolition conversation can become almost like a straw man if we say, well, yeah, we can invest in people who are addicts, we can invest in people who are et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then there are these moments where we have these tensions between people who the community believes need to be pulled away because they represent a danger, and our belief that the prison is not the way to do that, right? How do we respond to folk who say that their abolitionist dream is being compromised by these very real on-the-ground tensions and demands that they haven't gotten straight answers to? And I'm asking this partly to push y'all, and partly because I get, as an abolitionist myself, I get asked this question every day. What do we do with the rapist? What do we do with the child molester? How do we manage this? We're going to get back to drugs in 1 second. I just want to make sure. But I'm trying to establish a bigger vision for abolition that then allows us to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Because when I was wondering about this question myself and asking folks in Mississippi, like, what would you do without prisons? And that's the same response that I would get from most folks who, like you said, hadn't read about prison abolition and hadn't thought about it really. And like, what do we do with people? And, you know, when I think about this question, it's interesting. It's when you think about, it's like Back to the Future. Is when you think about the future, you think about stuff that we hear about used to go on back in the day, how we would self-govern our communities and how we would take care of our own inside of our families. And so that incident that you just described, almost the exact same incident happened a couple of weeks ago at my office. One of our mayoral candidates came by, and someone broke into his truck while he was there and stole his computer with all of his official business in it for the campaign, and the election is May 2nd. Yeah. So very important. So, you know, our first reaction was, okay, we have these security cameras. Let's go back and look, and let's call the police and make a report. The standard thing, you know, that we always do. And they were like, no, we're going to go out into the community and find out who has the laptop, and we're going to go find the laptop and get it back. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's going to be dangerous. But it wasn't. They went into the neighborhood because they knew the community. They found out who had the laptop and said, brother, we don't want any law enforcement involved. Give us the laptop back, and let's talk about some of the things that you need so you're not out here breaking in cars. And that's what happened. And that can happen. That can happen. And, you know, when we talk about the so-called dangerous folks, if we had everything that we needed in our communities, if we could go back to this cooperative way of thinking. I mean, Mississippi, when I think about Mississippi, when I think about the South, I think about land. You know, we have so much land that we don't use, that we don't make use of. And let me tell you, I'm the last person. I don't have any kind of green thumb. So, but we have so much land to use. And so if we had everything that we needed, if we were healthy, if we had all the housing that we needed, if we had all of the health care that we needed, would we get to the point where we needed these cages for so-called dangerous people? Would there be these so-called dangerous people who are a threat to society and our families? And if there was a small segment of our community that needed to be dealt with, don't we have folks in our communities that can deal with them? Yes, we do. So that is the world that I imagine. And like I said, this is a world that I've heard about, existed before in communities, hasn't been in my lifetime, but I know there's still communities like that, and I know that we can have them again.
Woo. This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. Subscribe now for free at mjagenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association and the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit MJBA.net for more details.
Georgia. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
It's like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
Learn more at mjagenda.com.
I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. Join me every 4 weeks for the Freedom Leaf Preview with Steve Bloom from Freedom Leaf Magazine. Learn more at mjagenda.com/about.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I inhale.
That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
Radical Rant. Today in the Rant, I want to talk about what seems to be the latest talking point coming out of prohibitionists, and it has to do with one of our best talking points, and that is that marijuana is safer than alcohol. Clearly, everybody knows this, or at least vast majorities understand this. You look at some of the latest polls, and about half of America understands marijuana is safer. Another quarter say that it's no worse than alcohol, which is a real insult to marijuana. But anyway, at least they're getting there. But when it comes to the talking point, the anti-talking point seems to be developing. And it has to do with the children. Of course, we always have to worry about the damn children.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
So it was an interview where Governor Hickenlooper out of Colorado was being asked again about marijuana legalization. And, we've gotten a lot of statements out of this guy. It was a bad idea. No, it was a good idea. Oh, it's going to be bad. No, it turns out it's not so bad. He's been all over the map on this thing. But it seems to me he's gotten the bug from Kevin Sabet and the Project Sam people, because they are pushing back hard on the marijuana is safer than alcohol talking point. And the way they're doing it is by trying to say that, yeah, marijuana's a bad thing, or alcohol's a bad thing. Yeah, we don't want kids drinking alcohol. But if a kid gets drunk on the weekend, it's not going to have lifelong consequences for him. Yeah, they're trying to say basically that alcohol is more dangerous in the short term, but less dangerous in the long term as compared to marijuana. And it's absolutely ridiculous. This is evidenced by Governor Hickenlooper's latest quote, which he was on the radio. I forget which station it was, but ColoradoPolitics.com has reported on this. And here's his quote. Tom Angel got this in the Marijuana Moment newsletter. Quote, "If you're a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old and you go out and drink some beers, nobody I've talked to thinks that affects the cognitive part of your brain as it matures. The high THC marijuana we have is so intense. If you're a teenager, it will take a sliver of your memory forever." Ah, my God. All right, so how should we attack this? Should we take a look at the science first? When you look at the studies on what happens to kids, teenagers, if they regularly drink beers, if they're regularly binge drinking, you take a look at the long-term effects, you find the kind of problems that the prohibitionists keep trying to ascribe to marijuana. You find the cognitive decline. You find the problems in school, the problems in later life. We're talking about a drug that is toxic and addictive. It's called alcohol, folks. And these guys want to say, well, you know, the kid drinks a beer. It's no big deal, but boy, if he gets a hold of some of that high THC, not your father's Woodstock weed, my God, the world's going to come to an end. It just ain't so, folks. It just ain't so. We've looked at the studies that, you know, Kevin Sabet and the prohibitionists, they want to say, you know, this is, if you're a teenager, it will take a sliver of your memory forever. No, it will not. The studies show that while you're high, you got a problem with short-term memory? Sure, like, where are my keys? Why'd they come in here? What's going on? Yeah, while you're high, sure. But in the long term, when you're not high, your long-term memory, there's not a problem with it. There's definitely, and this idea that you're burning away brain cells, you're somehow permanently losing memory, is what alcohol does. Alcohol actually does that. It actually does kill teenage brain cells and hurts their developing brain. The talking point also is based on this old study from about 2012, I think it was, where they found that there was twice the likelihood of people getting into auto wrecks if they were marijuana users. That got debunked when we started looking at age and gender. And there was a study out of New Zealand that purported that kids that smoked marijuana in their teen years were then going to lose up to 6 points of IQ, 6 to 8 points of IQ, by the time they hit middle age, even if they stop smoking pot. And this is where they're hanging their hat on this. If you're a teenager, it'll take a sliver of your memory forever. No. Here's what happened. First of all, when those numbers were run, everybody loved all the prohibitionists loved this study because it had such a great number of samples involved. It was, you know, thousands and thousands involved that were tracked over a long period of time. So that's good from a scientific standpoint. Where it went wrong is the researcher that said that it was going to kill IQ didn't account for other factors, like socioeconomic factors. Like people who are poor tend to end up smoking pot more often, and people that are poor also tend to be lower on the whatever scale that you're measuring. So this was backed up by a researcher, Ole Rogeberg, who 6 months later took the same data set and ran it through with some, let's check out some of these confounding variables, and found that the socioeconomic factors were more to blame than marijuana could be. But then a different study, this was out of King's College in London, studied twins. They studied one twin who smoked pot and one twin who did not smoke pot. And they found that, the pot smoking was associated with the decline in the IQ, but it happened for both teenagers, both the one that smoked pot and the one that didn't smoke pot. So that was insane, right? So what they're saying again is the factors that lead you to smoke pot are the same kind of factors that are going to affect intelligence. It's that those factors are leading to both, not that marijuana is leading to one or the other. So be ready for this talking point, because it's going to come up. They're going to say, we don't want the kids to drink, but if they get drunk once or twice, that's no big deal. Because that ain't true either. We'll talk more about this in Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. But that's all the time we have on today's Marijuana Agenda. Thanks for joining us on the podcast, and check us out at mjagenda.com. I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and SoundCloud. And follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!